Happy October and season of Halloween, everybody! For me, however, the season isn't so much about pumpkin spice flavorings, which, by the way, is just cinnamon and nutmeg anyway. It's not actually pumpkin anything, let alone spice. Or even about getting or giving candy. For me, it's the thrill of horror experiences and attention in convenient packages that I can push an emergency eject button on when my heartbeats start to exceed dangerously high thresholds. So once again, we're back into the breach, taking a look at some horror titles for your entertainment. And today, we're kicking it off with a twofer. Join me for a closer look at 123 Slaughter Me Street, Parts 1 and 2. Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snack, and today I want to begin with a little bit of context. I know literally nothing about the devs behind these titles, Nate Sanders and John Colbeck to be precise, or Impulse Game Studios LLC. I also don't know where the somewhat related YouTube channel Odd Stories YT, which was formerly known as Odd Stories for Odd Children, fits in, and if it even fits in anymore anyway. I actually discovered these games because I'm a fan of DA Games' music catalog and they did songs based on them, and also did some of the music for the mobile game apparently. So I'm going to judge these games exclusively based on what actually exists right now. That being the Steam versions of 123 Slaughter Me Street 1 and 2. So to do things right, let's assess first games first. Released on Steam September of 2015, in the wake of the explosion of indie horror titles all resulting from Five Nights at Freddy's suddenly booming into popularity, we are greeted into the first game with a small voiceover on a black background from local news station concerning the mysterious disappearance of puppeteer and puppet maker Tim Denson. Because subtle comedy is the best sort of comedy. We then hear a recount of an urban legend as Denson had become estranged from his family and was living in an apartment complex that, sometime later, people had found completely abandoned by both tenants and landlord alike. And now, legend has it, Denson's puppets roam the halls freely, seeking out their lost master so that they can finally go home with him. No one has confirmed this, of course, but most urban legends do have some merit of truth to them. We then skip to a year later when the criminal, as we know him for now, ends up in the same run-down apartment complex on the run from the law for some reason we've yet to discover. And now, wounded with a twisted ankle and a flashlight bordering on the completely useless, the criminal must now descend from his hiding spot on the 7th floor down to street level and escape the building he's been cooped up in for some unknown length of time. To begin with, the game looks muddy. I mean, it's nighttime, it's raining, the building's been abandoned for ages, and the only things keeping us company are three gremlin-like puppets known as the Fockles. More on them in a second. And while I get that all this should contribute to the dingy horror atmosphere, I must admit it leaves something to be desired. It's all pretty washed out, and the at-best antagonistic flashlight barely makes anything clearer than it was before. And since the hallways and branching off corridors all use the same textures and items, it becomes very samey too, which I find myself conflicted on during this assessment. On the one hand, it creates a somewhat lackluster visual experience, with most things in the environment being bland background noise. But on the other hand, that might very well be the point. It is a horror game, so repetition could be a representation of descent into madness and uncertainty of how far the criminal thus far has traveled and has yet to go. So, I don't know. But to be honest, it doesn't do a whole lot for me, and there's no real environmental feedback apart from the ever-approaching exit sign on the far end of each hallway. The Foggles themselves look plenty fierce, with the colossal follower always on your six and closing in fast. The bird-like greeter, who you will inevitably see a lot, has a lean, fit figure ready to claw your face off. And the waiter, this small, squat, yellow dragon puppet always in the wings, croaking away until you mistakenly ignore his presence. It's pretty good monster design, and it sticks close to the faux Muppet presentation that the dark parody sets out to achieve. The sound design is kinda found in a similar vein. You'll hear a chime when you pass by a side corridor, and you're prompted to look down each to check for the waiter. You can turn this off in the options, by the way, as it will happen a lot, and some people may not care for that. Speaking of the waiter, you'll also hear him growling if he's nearby, alerting you to his presence and prompting you to take the proactive response to him. Each level is also capped off with a small victory fanfare as you descend the stairwell to the next level. I must say, the audio experience likewise could have been more. but it's essential on the grounds the waiter's entire mechanic is listening for his audio cue. Which I must confess feels somewhat cheap in that FNAF 4 way, since listening out for him also means being hit full force by the jump scare sound. And on that note, let's talk gameplay. Fundamentally, the gameplay doesn't begin until you trigger it, as within the first few steps into these linear hallways, nothing will actually ever happen to you. I did an experiment with this actually, and none of the triggers are actually designed to go off, and you can wait indefinitely and never die in the first few steps of the hallway. However, that is a rather dull experience, so we use W to move forward. As we do, we can hit spacebar to turn on our flashlight and... ah boy, I get to talk about this now. The flashlight, both in story and in gameplay, is fundamentally broken. It turns itself off whenever it can. So you hit space, explained as you whacking it in order to try to get the light functioning again, to fight against it whenever it happens. But you can't just mash spacebar, because if the light is working and turned on, when you tap the spacebar you'll turn it off again. But there's literally no scenario where you ever want the light off. Literally everything from being able to see more than 2 feet in front of your face to warding off the foggles hinges on you having it primed and shining. No, forget about the giant killer puppets. The real villain of this game is the flashlight. And you'll be fighting it just as much as you do said killer puppets, repeatedly striking it in order to straighten out its behavior and desperately trying to keep them at bay at the same time. The follower will appear once you've traveled some distance from the start of the floor, and will consistently try to gain on you. Remember, our pro tag has a twisted ankle, and it will try to hit you out of nowhere if you're too slow. You can spin around with Q and shine your light on him to make him docile for a little, roughly in proportion to how long you can keep your light shining on him. The waiter operates somewhat similarly, but you look down the side hallways when you hear his growling and shine the light on him. He'll be disabled and then randomly appear elsewhere in the hallway if he can. And I saved this one for last, and she's likely the one who will kill you, the greeter. She will, and yes, it's a she, I checked the fan wiki, whip out some random doorways once you're close enough to block your path. You shine the light in her face and wait for her entirely too long flailing animation to end, because she can kill you if you blunder into her while she's playing it out, and then you can proceed with the follower now 30 paces closer to your back. And this is where I kind of run into a problem. You have every motivation to keep moving as quickly as possible once you start, which makes perfect sense, that's literally how the levels are laid out. But the waiter is nearly a non-factor since, if you keep an ear out, he's easily dealt with. The greeter, meanwhile, has a startup to her animation, and if you run into her at any point during it, your run is done and you get the jump scare. I died to the greeter infinitely more than any of the other two threats, and maybe the two combined, and this is in large part that while the follower indeed follows just one routine, which is to say chasing the player relentlessly, the greeter and the waiter run on RNG. So in some runs, she'll just hit you on the very first doorway, and in others I've had blind luck win the day, and I'll run straight to the end basically non-stop. This, coupled with the repeated jump scare animation, and how a game over results in you just restarting the hallway a few moments later, quickly made me numb to the entire horror ambiance. The fastest way to make something not scary is to expose yourself to it repeatedly, but that's kind of what the core gameplay loop is going to force you to do. And it's rather easy to lose your patience and just throw yourself at it repeatedly due to the short duration of any game overs. The surgically exacting tension I felt playing, say, Five Nights at Freddy's, hinged on just how precise everything moved and how methodical the inability to move or act made me feel. In 123 Slaughter Me Street, I'm in full control barring RNG, and it allows me to just dash headlong into it, so there's never really a chance for any build-up. Just a mild sense of frustration when a last-minute visit by the greeter slows me down enough for the follower to hit me in the back. All my complaints aside, this is honestly a good first take. But that's just it. It's good. It's alright. Decent. I didn't hate it, and I think the three threats were balanced in such a way to make the game overall manageable. With the fact that you can die during level transitions if you don't turn your light on mid-stairwell being a little vexing the first time I hit it. However, our tale doesn't end here. There was a sequel, so let's shift to that next. 123 Slaughter Me Street 2, also released on Steam Halloween Day of 2016, is a prequel story about Tim Denson and confirms that he was, indeed, the criminal in Game 1 and also the precise nature of what his crimes were. Driven to madness by a red, fiery, demonic puppet known as the Nightmare, he ended up killing his own daughter. Upside to this, every single time he died in my playthrough of the first game is now entirely justified. Go greeter, I guess. Graphically, it's a lot nicer and a lot busier than the first. You have an entire house and small yard to explore and work around in. There's pictures on the walls, props strewn across the house, and a level of deterioration to the environment which sinks in slowly as you progress through each night. And the audio work is a lot more diverse and a lot more useful to the player now. Given you operate within the confines of a house, you can hear the footsteps of threats moving around the place and, with benefit of headphones or surround sound, an accurate way to trace where it is in relation to you. More on that as we go. And rather than selecting a tutorial, a new game always begins Night 0, with all threats disabled and a pleasant voice explaining all the game mechanics. You use WASD mouse movement, interact with F, crouch with spacebar, and chief among them, a flashlight that actually works and has some merit to it. See, shining a light on certain areas reveals blue and green zones. Blue zones are hiding spots which you'll need to get into without line of sight from a threat, because you're not very well hidden if they see you go in, and green zones are safe spots which work regardless and call off the chase. This works because each night is split up into different phases, some that you need to wait out and others will require active input on the player's part. You begin each night in the timed pre-game segment, which allows you a chance to size up the situation and get lay of the house without any actual threats. Once that time runs down, however, the hide portion starts. You'll move to blue hiding spots and crouch down in them to absorb something out of them. It's a blue bar that runs down while you're in them, which gradually fills up a collective green bar. The green bar requires more of this energy, I guess. It needs more for each night, which changes the pace of the hide leg of the game. Once you empty a hiding spot of its juice, it becomes a green safe spot for the remainder of the night. But if your green bar isn't filled up yet, you must find another hiding spot and repeat the process, all the while avoiding being spotted while out in the open. You can run, but you'll fatigue if you do so for long stretches of time. An eye icon in the bottom right corner indicates when you're in the open, with an open white eye, when you're out of sight, the closed eye, or in line of sight of a direct threat, which changes the open eye to red. Using this, you'll fill the green bar, which ends the hide phase and initiates the seek phase. A pink line will briefly appear, guiding you to your destination, but if you can't act on it straight away, it will eventually vanish, leaving you to discern your end goal for yourself. And there, you'll find a pink glowing orb which you must collect. This changes to the last phase of the night, which is exit. The player must then rush to the front door of the house in order to clear the night. As the nights go on, not only does the Nightmare Puppet give us a lovely little poem now and then, we must also get more threats added to the mix. The first being the Seeker, the replacement for the Follower, who actively patrols around looking for the player. The second is the Stalker, who does much the same but tends to also stop and camp in places for longer than the ever-vigilant Seeker. And last is the Screamer, who is, to me at least, the most visually unnerving of all enemies, but it won't try to chase you directly. Instead, if it sees you and you can't ward it off with your light, it will scream to draw the attention of the Seeker and Stalker to your present location. And frankly, this is such a huge improvement from the first game. The phases give the player a better sense of what to expect and how to change their strategy, especially using the pre-game leg, which allows for a moment to consider all the possible routes. The house contains both an upstairs and a basement area, both being possible dead ends if a chase takes a turn for the worse. And the tension runs high. You have more ways of staving off an attack using safe zones, and while the hiding spots remain consistent night to night, that doesn't mean you can relax. As if an enemy sees you dive into a hiding spot that won't do you any good. Safe zones, meanwhile, remain safe no matter what. Ultimately, this is a sequel that took everything the first game did and hurled it out the window and started fresh. And all for the better, I'd argue. Gameplay is fast, tight, stressful, and pulse-pounding. Every time I rounded a corner, I'd often worry, is there an enemy here? Which one? And what's my escape route if there is? Just absolutely masterfully done. Were I to issue complaint, it's just that the enemy AI tended to follow fairly simple and predictable routines, so I opted for familiar, safe strategies every night, which generally seemed to work somewhat consistently. While that ate away at some of the frustration of dying during the exit phase, it also chipped away at the sheer terror of it all. And due to some excellent environmental storytelling and good use of inanimate props in the house, the game creates an excellently terrifying experience. It's a simple but immensely entertaining game, perfect to kick off our month of horror gaming goodness. Links, as always, in the description below. And this has been the Slaughter Me Sneck, bringing a bit of indie excellence to get the month started off right. If you liked today's episode, hit the like button so I know. Also, leave a comment down below. Had you played these games before today? Or watched Odd Stories for Odd Children? Let me know. And for more like this, and to really help the channel out, kindly hit that subscribe button for more like this each and every week. There's reviews, let's plays, tech analyses, and Season 2 of the Tomodachi Bros Review podcast all right here. Join me here, and I will see you there.
much less my breath, you stole this shape.